Thanks for joining. I'm super excited to have Moises Viveros join us this evening. A little bit about Moises is they are a public health specialist at the health department at the city of Minneapolis. And in their role, they work under the Homegrown Minneapolis Initiative to manage relationships and contracts with food security partners, while also supporting development of the Minneapolis Food Vision and other projects. They originally come from Chicago, where they received their BA in Sustainability Studies at Roosevelt University, and then completed their Master's in Food Studies and an MBA at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. They also serve on the board of directors at the Seaward Co-op in Minneapolis, and Moises has extensive experience working with a variety of startups, movements, organizations, and nonprofits that are centered around principles of food sovereignty. So Moises, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, and we'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you all so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be in company with all of you. Today's presentation is going to be a little bit different than what you might be used to. I'm not going to be talking about like greenhouse gas emissions or anything that's like too concretely about sustainability, but I think it's all related. So you'll be hearing a little bit more about food insecurity in Minneapolis or Minnesota in general. What the city of Minneapolis is doing to address this through its homegrown initiative and Minneapolis Food Vision, and some community engagement tactics that you could take back to your own climate work and circles they work in. So I hope this information is very informational. You find it super interesting. So let's get started. So first, I want to start off by identifying food insecurity. So many, if not all of us, are aware that food insecurity is an issue that affects millions of lives in the US alone. So at this presentation, we're going to be talking a lot about it. So for those that may not be familiar with the term or the concept, I want to start by defining this term. The USDA has its own definition, and that is a lack of consistent access to enough food for every person in a household to live an active and healthy life. The USDA then breaks this down into two different levels of food insecurity, where low food insecurity indicates reduced quality, variety, or desirability of diet with little or no indication of reduced food intake. And very low food insecurity is defined as reports of multiple indications of disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. However, I personally like to take this definition a step further by adding some cultural and societal elements to it. Culturally relevant foods are important as they can bring comfort and familiarity to people, and we also want to maintain dignity in the ways that people procure these foods. Throughout my personal career, I've developed the following as a definition that I use to describe the term food insecurity, and that is a condition or period in which a household or individual is unable to acquire or maintain through socially acceptable methods a constant supply of culturally relevant food that is necessary for one to meet one's daily nutritional intake requirements. While food insecurity is an issue that can affect everyone, it is worth examining who is being affected and who is most likely to encounter food insecurity in their lives. In comparison to the national average of 10.2%, the rate of food insecure households stands at 16.2% for Hispanic households, 19.8% for Black non-Hispanic households, and 24.3% for households with children headed by a single mother. While these are nationwide statistics, the rates of food insecurity that we see in the state of Minnesota align closely to these numbers. In 2021, Second Harvest Heartland, the food bank that serves the Twin Cities metro area, reported that 1 in 17, or roughly 5.9% of Minnesotans are food insecure. When we look closely at race and other demographics, we also see that the rates of food insecurity for Black, Hispanic, and households with children are higher than the state average, which is consistent with the data for the nationwide averages. So why is it that Black, Brown, and other marginalized communities experience higher rates of food insecurity? We would probably need multiple seminars to unpack and discuss the root causes of food insecurity, and even then we would just be scratching the surface. But since I only have about 20 minutes to present and a lot more slides to get through, I'll try my best to explain this very briefly. Food insecurity is just one symptom of a system that has historically and currently oppresses people that hold marginalized identities. Discrimination, violence, racism, erasure, and many other oppressive powers increase the likelihood that marginalized individuals will experience food insecurity, unemployment, housing discrimination, poverty, and many other conditions that greatly impact one's health, economic stability, and overall ability to live fulfilling and happy lives. On this slide are just a handful of statistics that demonstrate some of the historical and current conditions that marginalized communities face when trying to obtain housing, hold employment, and build wealth. All of these issues are interconnected with issues like food insecurity. Additionally, when these marginalized identities overlap, it increases the likelihood that an individual or community will be susceptible to oppressive conditions like food insecurity. Intersectionality is a term that was coined in 1989 by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and is a term to describe the interactions between gender, race, and other identities, social factors, and how these overlapping oppressed identities influence one's social standing, outcomes, and engagements with others. The aforementioned food insecurity statistics demonstrate that Black households and households with children headed by a single woman, in comparison to the greater population, are much more likely to encounter a higher level of food insecurity. But what would these statistics look like for a household with children headed by a single woman that is also Black? In addition to this, what other identities are not being represented in the data that's reported by the USDA or other organizations? What we could take away from this is that multiply marginalized individuals are much more susceptible to issues like food insecurity, and that we must account for these experiences and voices when creating strategy and action that aims to address these oppressive systems and powers. The city of Minneapolis is aiming to address these disparities in our food system by actively engaging community members from all backgrounds and experiences through its Homegrown initiative. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Homegrown Minneapolis, it was launched in 2008, and it is a city community partnership expanding our community's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy, sustainable, locally grown foods. Homegrown's current body of work is primarily focused on supporting community and market gardens on city-owned land, supporting the city's 20+ farmers markets, helping fund food shelves and providing technical assistance to those that are partnered with the city, and staffing the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council. The Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council is a 25-member city advisory group that was launched in 2012. It is appointed by and reports to the mayor and city council. It is comprised of 17 community members and 8 city representatives. The Food Council works with diverse stakeholders to build a healthy, resilient local food system and connects local government, businesses, organizations, and residents. As you can see on this slide, the Food Council does a variety of things. The Food Council led the development of the Minneapolis Food Vision and will guide and monitor its implementation over the next 10 years. So the Minneapolis Food Vision is a 2033 vision for a more equitable, climate resilient, just and sustainable local food system and local food economy. It includes priority areas, strategies, and suggested metrics, and is focused on municipal policy and investment and food council action. The Minneapolis Food Vision is based on past work and is in alignment with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which is a commitment to developing and employing a plan for how to nurture a just, equitable, and resilient local food system. In addition to being a standalone document, the Food Vision is a companion to the city's forthcoming climate equity plan. And just a little plug there, we are currently collecting feedback for the city's climate equity plan. So if any of you engage, live in, or work in Minneapolis in any capacity, we do encourage you to go on the city website and provide feedback to that plan, which I can hopefully find a link in the chat in a little bit. When Homegrown Minneapolis started this work to develop a vision for the food system, the Food Council developed some guiding food justice principles. We wanted to make sure this work was grounded in shared values that were developed through community input and guidance. The 7 food justice principles that you see here serve as a values-based framework to guide the content, priorities, and implementation of the Minneapolis Food Vision with a focus on equity, and they include social determinants of health, inclusion, leadership, and decision-making, recognition, reparations, and respect, interconnections between systems, food access, food production and processing, and food skills. Additionally, the Minneapolis Food Vision is organized around 6 priority areas with 29 strategies that support them. The local food supply priority area is focused on increasing the availability of locally grown and made food. The second priority, urban agriculture, is about supporting growing food within our city. The local food businesses priority area is about supporting our city's food enterprises and workers. Priority 4, healthy food skills and healthy food access, contains strategies about building food skills and access to diverse, healthy, and culturally relevant foods. The wasted food priority is focused on preventing food from being wasted by diverting edible food to those in need and composting the inedible wasted food that remains. The final priority area is food system research and outreach, with strategies focused on understanding key issues and solutions to advance a just and sustainable food system. These priority areas and their strategies were developed through extensive community engagement. Over 1,000 people were involved in the development of the Minneapolis Food Vision. In 2019 and 2020, we had focus groups and individual interviews with content experts and community members. In fall of 2021, 6 priority area specific online events to refine strategies. Spring of 2022, the city launched a citywide survey with nearly 1,000 responses and 900 usable responses. Spring of 2022, culturally specific community organizations with 5 community organizations and 122 people were held. And then we also had 4 community peer reviewers be a part of the process. We had an online public feedback forum. And sorry, my notes are a little scrambled, so I'm like, what happened there? So on the next one. So the process for developing the food vision began in the spring of 2019 and unfortunately was delayed by COVID-19. So the Food Council began with creating the food justice principles, followed by identifying the 6 priority areas and 29 strategies. These were developed through not only Food Council meetings, but as I talked about before, also involved content expert interviews, community focus groups, and topic-specific online events. Following the identification of the priority areas and strategies, we did extensive community engagement to prioritize and refine them. So in February of 2022, we launched an online survey that was distributed through a diverse range of city communication channels, including through social media posts like the one you see here on the screen. We received over 900 usable responses that helped us further refine the recommendations. And sorry, the tornado alarm just started ringing, so I was like, what was that? We know the demographics of online survey respondents tend to skew than what's actually representative of our city's actual population. So in addition to, we also recognize the technical barriers that people can face when trying to access an online survey or trying to read it in English. So in addition to the online survey, we also worked with 5 community-based cultural organizations to host community conversations. Between January and March in 2022, we hosted conversations through Appetite for Change, Advancement of Hmong Americans, CLUES, which is Comunidades Latinas Unidas en Servicio, Harvest from the Heart, and the Somali American Farmers Association. And through all of these seminars, we had over 122 participants. The feedback contributed to the prioritization process, also helped provide other helpful guidance. The Minneapolis Food Vision was drafted over summer and fall of 2022. The Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council provided guidance on the outline and reviewed drafts of each section. In November of 2022, the full draft was also reviewed by 4 community peer reviewers, as seen on this slide. The public also had an opportunity to provide comment through an online feedback form. And following the resulting edits, the Food Council unanimously endorsed the Minneapolis Food Vision on December 14th, 2022. Subsequently, the Minneapolis City Council and Mayor formally adopted and approved the Minneapolis Food Vision in March 2023. And at the moment, we're currently working on creating a pretty graphically designed version of the Minneapolis Food Vision that we hope to release to the public later this spring. So we will be making announcements and hopefully you all get to see the final product. The next phase for the Minneapolis Food Vision is implementation and action planning. So the Food Vision is a 10-year vision document. However, implementation plans will be on shorter timeframes. Right now, we're starting off with a 1 to 2 year implementation plan. To help facilitate this process, we invited community members to partake in one of 3 focus areas that our Food Council previously identified as most important and interesting. They are local food procurement, urban land access and season extension, and healthy food skills. And through additional community feedback, we also are looking at creating a 4th work group, which will focus on food access and equity. And I could read, and some of the strategies that we're focusing on in these work groups for local food procurement. We are looking to increase purchasing of locally and sustainably grown foods by institutions and businesses within the city. Improve accessibility to and availability of nutritious, culturally relevant, locally and sustainable grown foods at places such as schools, universities, hospitals, care facilities, child providers, correctional facilities, hunger relief programs, work sites, and the other places where food is sold and eaten. For urban agriculture work group, our strategy is to increase, maintain, and improve land access within the city for growers and year-round growing. And finally, for food skills, we are looking to strengthen food skills to grow, prepare, and preserve healthy, culturally relevant foods for all people with a focus on underserved communities. So some of the examples that, or some of the strategies that we implemented during our last April meeting for food skills were creating a requirement for high schools to have home ec as part of the Gen Ed requirement. For local food procurement, we're looking at the feasibility of adopting a good food purchasing policy, which would be a values-based procurement and purchasing policy for any city-owned entity or any city-funded project or entity. And then for, which one am I missing? And then for the urban agriculture group, we're also looking at doing, one of the strategies that was floated was looking at doing an inventory of all usable land that can be used for agricultural purposes in the city of Minneapolis. So as we wrap up today's presentation, I want to leave you with a few suggestions on how you can also uplift and center marginalized voices in your work. Marginalized communities, namely Black, Brown, and working class communities, are the most impacted by climate change and will continue to be. Therefore, it's important that we advocate for these communities in our work and let them lead the charge. Community engagement is critical to creating strategy and action around climate change and extends beyond sending out surveys or holding community meetings. While these can be impactful strategies, I recommend keeping these things in mind as you carry out this work. Recognize past harms and how this can color how you engage with community and how community engages with you. Do you have trust built with your community, and how can you build and maintain it? People are experts of their own lived experiences, meaning that community members come with a lot of expertise, knowledge, and experience that is necessary to shape climate strategy and action. Treat community members as you would a paid consultant and let their knowledge lead to action. Meet people where they're at and understand where they want to be. Climate work can be daunting for people that may not have the knowledge or background that may be necessary to do this work. Take the time to understand where your community is at, what barriers are present, what people want to learn more about or do, and how we could collectively work together to uplift people to get them where they want to be. And finally, accessibility is key. And this not only includes physical accessibility, but also emotional and knowledge accessibility. Ask yourself, what is preventing people from being able to do this work? Is it childcare? Is your space physically accessible? Are you using concepts or language that may be unfamiliar to people? Are there translators available for people? Is there space for people to talk about, how climate change affects their lives in that other community? And are we holding space for people when they get emotionally upset or charged because of what they're talking about? What can we do to support community in these spaces? And that's it for my presentation. So I wanted to leave a little room for some questions if we have some time.
I had a question, and it's really at a tactical level, and you use the example of Second Harvest Heartland, and I just happened to see their fundraiser commercial last night where they talked about, during the pandemic, obviously food insecurity dramatically increased, and they were delivering something like 4 million meals, an astronomical number. But since then, coming into 2023, the numbers have dramatically grown. I mean, it's 15 to 20% higher demand now. They need to deliver at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 5.5 million meals. So food insecurity is increasing at a very tactical, practical level where people are going hungry every day, right? And you've got obviously the new bill that will help certainly school kids, but that doesn't take effect till next September. A lot of what you're talking about seems to be a long-term strategy, certainly, which is really valuable in kind of shifting the whole paradigm and hopefully, building a much stronger foundation for eliminating food insecurity at a variety of levels. But what are you guys doing at the city level to augment what something like an entity like Second Harvest Heartland is doing to actually, provide meals to those that are suffering right now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So throughout the pandemic, there was a variety of funding made at the federal level to help alleviate some of the impacts of COVID on communities. So the city received different funds from federal sources. We received ARPA funds, which is the American Recovery Plan or something along those lines. We received community development block grants. And what the city did was allocate some of those grants to community partners. So Homegrown Minneapolis already existed, when the pandemic happened. And we kind of shifted our work to also include our food security partners. So the food security arm of Homegrown Minneapolis is pretty new. And what we've been doing is we've been providing funds, resources, and technical assistance to 15 food security partners. And some of those are work directly with Second Harvest Heartland. So we've been providing funds to help them provide salaries, wages, provide purchase hygiene resources, and other essential items needed for them to carry out their daily operations and to better serve the communities that they're working in. As of now, that funding has already been allocated to our partners, and the city doesn't have plans to release more funding for those partners. But what we have been doing is connecting them with different community organizations, providing technical assistance, and also referring them to organizations like the Foundation for Essential Needs, which is an organization that provides a lot of technical assistance to food shelves in terms of space layout, grants, and budget procurement, and just like overall fundraising, and then just like overall long-term support. So they do. So we've been, trying to prepare people for, what's next after the city funding ends, and how can we continue to sustain these organizations so they could better continue to serve their communities.
Great. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question. I'm wondering, when you're talking about local food growing, I live next to a park, and I also live next to public housing, and there's a lot of space there for perennial foods like trees, fruit trees, that kind of stuff. I know in the past, the park board has been against planting apple trees or whatever, for whatever reason. I think they feel it's more maintenance. So I'm wondering, is that something you guys are considering, like looking at schools for that? And I realize that's not going to solve the problem. I'm just curious if that's one of your tactics.
No, that's a great question. I mean, I'm definitely an advocate of turning any usable gardening space into a garden. So that's a really great question. I unfortunately don't have much insight into that sector of our work, because we focus on our food security work, but I know it's you run into issues of policies and just how the park board works, and then you also run into zoning issues and all these other fun government things that can dictate what you can.
There's zoning. Are there zoning issues around planting fruit trees? Because we're actually going to be working with the local school to plant a cherry tree at their place.
Yeah, I was talking a little bit more broadly in terms of like actually creating like a full scale like urban garden.
Okay, good. Okay. All of a sudden, because I just started paying attention to zoning, and it does seem like they might actually have an issue. Okay, so it's.
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. You're
Okay.
Reaching out to, the park board, and you're also reaching out to Minneapolis Public Schools, which I know has been a really great leader in like, the School to Garden program, or, just really focus on, getting the kids, bringing gardening spaces to schools and also procuring from local growers and producers for their school lunch program. So I would definitely, yeah, unfortunately with the park board, it's kind of a difficult thing because they're not a city entity, they're their own entity. So I unfortunately don't have much insight into that area. But, like I said, you're on the right track by, reaching out to these institutions and just
Okay.
seeing what can be done.
Well, and for those concerned about the children, that the kids aren't getting free lunches until September, I know this is something that nobody ever talks about, but the park near my house, they actually provide free lunches for anybody under age 18 throughout the summer. So that parks are a real good buffer for people with food insecurity. I just found that interesting because it's not talked about much.
Yeah, and that's something we've been trying to do through Homegrown Minneapolis. So we're housed under the health department. Previously, we didn't have anyone working specifically on communications and marketing, and we just hired someone on. So I've been working with them to push out this messaging. And one of the things that we're doing is providing resources like, the free lunches in the parks, and any other like free food resources that are available to residents. We definitely want to promote those on social media. So if you follow the city health department on either Facebook or Twitter, you'll start to see some of that messaging coming out soon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I see Tim had his hand up.
Thank you. I was wondering, has Minneapolis established any guidelines as to how far is too far to go for good food, and also any pricing guidelines?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question because we had a pretty robust conversation about this last week during our food council meeting. And we actually had some community experts from the Good Acre come out and be a part of our local food procurement group. And they actually told us that, they don't have a definition for local. It's kind of hard to define, what distance you go because, is it the geographical borders of Minnesota? And if you do that, you're excluding areas that are close to us in Wisconsin and other neighboring states. And also, how much food can you realistically grow, within that defined boundary? So these are things that we have to keep in consideration, when looking at local food procurement. But the suggestion that was made during that conversation was to have a values-based procurement strategy that can include distance or local foods, but it also includes other things like, does the grower use sustainable and regenerative agricultural methods? Are they certified organic? Are they minority owned? And, there's a lot of other things that you could consider that could give weight to your food as you're procuring them. But yeah, local, as it's been on our mind for a while because we were also doing work for the circular or the climate equity plan for the city, and wasted food and local food procurement were one of the strategies that we're working on for that. So we ran into the issue of, well, what's the perfect distance for us to procure food from? And, we just ran into all those issues. So I think, this is why our local food procurement group is proposing, either modeling after the good food purchasing program, or creating something similar to that, just because it's a little more practical, but it also allows us to, make sure that we're procuring food that's sustainable, that's local, and that, has the overall positive impact in our community.
Yeah, I was actually asking to the other side of the question, not so much procurement, but the obtaining it by individual parties. In other words, how far should I have to walk or drive in order to get food? Should a bus be available to me? That kind of thing. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's also an important part too. I mean, that's also something we're talking about. So as some of you may know, Aldi and Walgreens recently closed in North Minneapolis, and now there's the Walmart nearby in Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center, one of the two, that's closing down as well. So you're losing a lot of food access points in that area. So now we're running into issues of, how far do people have to travel? Can people get there? And how is this impacting, people's overall livelihood? So I mean, there are like technical definitions from the USDA that say like, this is like not the ideal distance that people should be traveling to get to a grocery store, but what would constitute like what's called a food desert. So how many, how far do people have to travel to get to food and, stuff like that. So We're talking about this at the city level. We're talking about this with a number of different community partners. But, overall, within Homegrown and with some of the people we've been talking to, we're really trying to be intentional about, making sure that everyone has equitable access to food and, the foods that they want.
Thank you.
Of course. Julie, I think you're up next.
Okay, so my question's a kind of a twofold on, or multiple fold on how you're working with others, because I know you guys are Minneapolis and Minneapolis is doing a great job. And like Mary mentioned about the parks, I wondered, are you aware, first of all, of other communities in the greater metro area that are doing some of these initiatives? And you might not be since you're with Minneapolis, but I'm guessing you guys all work together a little bit. And I also wondered, are you working with Minneapolis Edible Boulevards at all? Are you aware of that organization?
So to answer, Edible Boulevards, yes. Unfortunately, can't really speak to that much because that I wish my colleague Grace were here because she does all of the urban agriculture gardening work and she would have more answers. Whenever we finish up, I will be sure to drop links for our website and some contact information. So you could hopefully get those questions answered that way. But in terms of other neighboring cities, I don't believe there's any other city in Minnesota or within the metro area that has an initiative like Homegrown. I know Ramsey County has a food systems coordinator, and they recently put out a food access study back in 2021, I believe. But to the extent that Minneapolis is, focusing on trying to, build a more local, equitable food system, I haven't seen any other efforts. Doesn't mean that it's, they're not of importance to these other cities, but I think Minneapolis might be unique, at least in Minnesota, in the sense that we have an initiative that's directly working on this field of work.
That's great that you guys have always been kind of leaders in that kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll start the trend and it'll move statewide. And then I just wanted to also give you the heads up if you aren't familiar with the organization. But I know somebody that's very involved with an organization called Feed Iowa First out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And they are also huge social equity. And they actually have a bus that travels with homegrown produce to food desert communities. So you might take a look at them and talk to them. And if you need more information, reach out to Tim and I can connect you with the person I know there, who was the one who kind of started some of the gardens and the bus tour. Mm-hmm. So they're doing some great things down there too. So
of course, good. I appreciate that connection.
Yeah.
Natalie, go ahead.
All right, awesome. So my question is kind of around the lines of focusing on like nutrient density in foods and access to. So it's kind of like a two-part question. And so the first question is like, how does the city prioritize access to nutrient dense foods, kind of given all the dynamics? And then secondly, in terms of like, when we think about the free lunch programs, is there a nutrient dense like intention behind what foods are offered to the children and to the schools just in general?
Yeah, I'll start by answering your second one first, because I unfortunately don't have much insight into that. I know I toured Minneapolis Public Schools Culinary and Wellness Nutrition Center. I could probably butcher that up, but where they make the school meals. And I know there's a heavy emphasis on using whole ingredients and scratch cooking. So we toured their facility. We saw their equipment that they use to chop up vegetables to produce these meals every day. And there's, we definitely saw firsthand like how they're trying to introduce more nutritionally whole foods into the diets. So like an example that they use is like, kids love chicken nuggets, but as we know, chicken nuggets just tend to be very processed, pulverized like meat products. And what they started doing was, I think they call them like chicken chunks, but it's like whole cuts of chicken. So it's, something that the kids still like, but, it's a less processed, hopefully a little bit more nutritionally dense option. So for them, it's kind of a fine balance of, you know, trying to provide something that kids will actually eat. And as we all know, kids are very picky eaters. And at the same time, too, something that, you know, is nutritionally dense and whole. So I think they're doing a pretty good job in terms of how the state is approaching it. I honestly think it's a district by district decision, you know, because some of the school districts work with a third party vendor or caterer. So unfortunately, they are at the mercy of what that caterer is able to do and provide for the school districts. I think Minneapolis is a little unique because it has its own in-house system. So they have a little bit more freedom and leeway on, you know, what they are feeding school kids. Can you repeat your first question?
Yeah, it was just more along the lines of like, how does the city prioritize access to nutrient dense food? So obviously like farmers markets are a great, you know, access point to just a variety of good whole foods, but does the city kind of prioritize that, or do they really highlight access or opportunities to access nutrient dense foods?
I will say yes, there are initiatives to increase access to nutritionally dense foods. So one big example is the Staple Food Ordinance. And that means that any business that's licensed as a grocery store within the city limits of Minneapolis has to sell a specific item or specific list of grocery staples. So that's bread, milk, eggs, you know, and there's also further guidelines on, you know, whole grains, fresh fruits, frozen produce, and, you know, all these other items. So if, you know, if you want to be a grocery store in Minneapolis, you have to abide by these, by this ordinance. And we also provide some technical assistance to grocers to ensure that they're able to comply with this ordinance. So we've connected them with partners like Brightside Produce, as well as other vendors and wholesalers in the area. So that has helped to increase the availability of fresh whole foods in different areas of the city. But unfortunately, you know, we still run into the issue of, you know, larger grocery stores shutting down, and that's where majority of people usually do their grocery shopping. So right now, North Minneapolis is the focus area because they probably have like 2 grocery stores within their city limits. You have North Market, and then you have Cup Foods, and then there's just emptiness in the middle. So we've been working with the county. We've been working with our, I forget the actual name of the department, but it's the economics and development. I forget the actual name, but city planning, economics and development. We've been working with them to see if there's anything that we could do to attract another retailer to that space. So that's what we're doing in terms of like physical food access and food access points. And then in terms of like getting other entities to like purchase nutritional whole foods, like I said, we don't have like a good food purchasing policy in place, but we do have kind of like a list of guidelines we provide to like our food security partners that say, because you're receiving city funds, you know, you have to purchase whole nutritionally dense foods. So we don't allow like refined sugars, you know, candy, you know, stuff like that to be purchased with city funds. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. And Bill, you're up next.
Thank you, Moises. I'm involved with my local electric utility, which is a cooperative, and I see as these for-profit grocers are moving out, that there's kind of a similar situation going on with food availability. That, you know, in the era of starting rural electric cooperatives, the for-profit companies didn't serve the farmers, so the farmers formed their own businesses to provide the electricity they needed. And I'm wondering, has anybody looked at using that kind of a technique where, you know, it's locally owned, locally run, and not for profit, and meant for the benefit of the community? You know, it's worked out really well in the electric industry, and I'm wondering, has that been tried in these food desert areas?
Are you talking specifically about like cooperative or just?
So the basic
general, like,
idea behind a cooperative is when you're not being served, you come together as a community, you form a nonprofit, and that nonprofit exists to serve. So for example, you might take over one of these store spaces that's being vacated. You would buy foods in wholesale, and then with local involvement from the community, people working at the cooperative, people being on the board of the cooperative, making decisions about what the cooperative's direction is going to be and how they're going to serve the community. And then it takes some time, but building up a service that's not going to leave, because it is the community, right? It's anchored in the community. It's not, there's no incentive for them to pick up and move somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, you know, Minneapolis or the Twin Cities metro area has a pretty robust collection of grocery cooperatives. And there's, you know, a pretty lengthy history of, you know, many coming and going. So that idea is definitely there. And, you know, people are definitely invested in these entities. But unfortunately, you know, there's not a cooperative in North Minneapolis, which right now is, you know, our focus area because it's most impacted. However, there is a store called North Market in North Minneapolis that's owned and operated by Pillsbury United Companies, and they're a nonprofit that provides a variety of community resources to pretty much every community in Minneapolis. So I know through the North Market, they try to keep prices accessible. They try to, you know, provide products that the community is looking for. And they also provide discounts to community members on a pretty regular basis. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe every Wednesday, All Produce is half off at North Market. And I know there's efforts to expand on their accessibility and just the ways that they could better serve their community, especially now that there is a much higher need for a grocery store in that area. But yeah, I mean, I think that I'm with you on that. I think, you know, community-owned entities, you know, can definitely better serve the community, impacted communities, and just communities in general. It's, you know, they're just difficult because it's a matter of, you know, there's a lot of time, resources, and just all these different things that are required to really make this happen. But it's definitely not impossible.
Yeah, just to explore this just a little bit more, you know, REI is a cooperative, but I don't really see them so much in this vein of serving a need that's unmet. They're actually competing in a market that's met in many ways. What I'm thinking, what I'm kind of envisioning here is that to begin with, this cooperative wouldn't even necessarily provide all the kinds of groceries that people would want, but it would take advantage of some opportunities to buy some things and provide some services and food at a good value, and then building on that as time goes on. I don't know. It's I think a little different than, I mean, I've got a cooperative just down the street from me, and I would not call that a cooperative in the sense of, you know, meeting the community's needs. It's more like meeting kind of a esoteric slice of the market, really. I mean, it caters to people who want to go beyond what and what I'm envisioning is something that's really basic.
No, yeah. I definitely hear what you're saying. You know, as Natalie said earlier, I currently sit on the board at Seward Co-op. And so I have a little bit of insight into these unique challenges. I mean, grocery in general is a pretty tricky industry to get in because, you know, margins are so tight and, you know, you have to do what you can to stay afloat. So unfortunately, you know, sometimes, you know, groceries stores in order to stay afloat, you know, have to, you know, I don't know how to phrase this, but we essentially have to like kind of like follow with trends, you know, in order to stay profitable and stay, you know, pretty much stay profitable and open and continue to be able to serve communities. That doesn't mean, however, that, you know, there's not space to listen to community needs and really bring in a product that's reflective of the community. I think it's difficult to balance those two out. So it's tricky, you know, it's a very big issue that unfortunately, you know, is beyond the realm of like, you know, what a lot of cooperatives can do. And, you know, but yeah, I definitely agree. You know, there's definitely the potential for more of these community owned entities to come up, but, you know, it's difficult, you know, like I said, they require a lot of resources, time and investment. But yeah, they're definitely still possible though.